You ever noticed how most slab style phones on the market today all kind of feel the same? It doesn't matter whether you go Apple, Google, Samsung, OnePlus, Honor and so on, the general sentiment is that it's hard to buy a bad phone right now because we've seemingly hit a bit of a plateau and no one in particular is really behind the rest. So why is that? And more importantly, where do we go from here? Hey guys, I'm Ryan Thomas, and the general gist of a high-end smartphone in 2024 is a big thing with thin bezels about 9mm thick, a 6.6 to 6.9 inch Quad HD-ish display at 120Hz, a 5000 mAh battery, 3 or 4 cameras on the back, and a 1 to 2 day battery life. Most flagships deliver something along those lines, and it's been like that for like 4 or 5 years at this point. It doesn't feel like we've made significant progress really since like the Galaxy S20 Ultra. Sure, we've seen thinner bezels, flat sides, bigger screens, and of course the new AI software trickery that many firms are blasting from the rooftops in their new marketing material right now. But by and large, if you bought a phone 3 or 4 years ago, it's likely still really good today. So what comes next? Well, it all starts with something called compute. See, it's not as if big phone makers haven't experimented or tried to break the mold. I mean, we've seen different camera setups, bigger sensors, split batteries, motorized selfie cameras, remember those? Curved displays, and way faster charging too. Of course, all these things really designed to improve the user experience. But as you might have noticed, a lot of companies, especially over in the West, sort of pulled back a little bit and have released more tame models over the past 2 or 3 years. The more eccentric devices don't tend to be all that popular and so sell way fewer units over here. And these same companies have noticed something interesting in this time as well. Most people, and I really do mean most people, care about 4 main things on their smartphone: cameras, battery life, to some extent performance because it's got so good, and they generally also care about the size and form factor because having a phone that's way too unwieldy is never a good time, and neither is having a phone that you can barely read. And whilst we've tried to improve and innovate in these areas with quad or even penta cameras, using huge sensors with big camera humps, making batteries 5 or even 6,000 mAh, and as a result thickening the chassis, and packing in more and more cores, more RAM, higher clock speeds, just making everything bigger, we can only get so far before things start to get a bit extreme. Devices become really dense and heavy, or they burn through batteries like it's their job. I mean, how many of you remember the Snapdragon 810? The thing was packed with high-end performance cores that wreaked havoc, causing boot loops, performance issues, hard crashing, and ran hotter than the surface of the sun. And that's a fact, by the way. It made whole phones basically unusable. That thing was a menace, to say the least, but an example of what happens when you push these things too far. But almost everything that a smartphone does can and is affected by compute, the performance and efficiency characteristics of the SoC. Because it's not just a CPU and a GPU, it has an NPU or neural processing unit for AI acceleration, which, whether you like it or not, is actually a big part of our smartphones' inner workings these days. The SoC also has the ISP or image signal processor for, as the name suggests, processing images that come from the camera sensors. The SoC controls modems like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, LTE, 5G and so on. The SoC is basically responsible for the whole phone's operation. And since the whole experience stems from this one chip, it makes sense to optimize it and focus on it versus the ancillaries that, in isolation, don't affect each other. The prime example being, if you focused on the cameras, pun intended, that's not necessarily going to affect the battery life or the thermal constraints of the rest of the phone. Better to focus on the hub that will affect the rest. Suddenly, if you can absolutely nail the compute, the phone could last multiple days on a charge since the SoC doesn't need to use so much power and wouldn't waste it so much thermally. It would be more efficient. The camera wouldn't need to be a 1-inch sensor if the ISP could pluck heaps of detail and dynamic range from processing HDRs quicker and more efficiently, especially with AI seemingly coming in to take over smartphones as we really know it. Compute, and better compute, would make the difference. And maybe more interestingly, if we could nail this efficiency, maybe you don't need a 4,000 or 5,000 mAh battery for an all-day phone anymore. Maybe devices could get smaller again without major sacrifice, and I don't just mean thinner. And this might be a little far-fetched, but maybe a DeX-like setup for Android and smartphones as a whole becomes really viable, and our portable devices can now run our desktop environments too. We've seen in recent times just how good Apple's M-series laptops and Qualcomm's ARM notebooks have become. Sure, the tech might need a couple more years to mature, and for the software developer houses to migrate and make their packages compatible with ARM, and especially more optimized, but for the most part, you only tend to hear good things about MacBooks on ARM. So what's to stop Galaxy, Xiaomi or Oppo phones from being able to be one little device that hooks up to your monitor, connects to your mouse and keyboard, maybe headphones via Bluetooth, and then becomes your portable office that you can just carry around in your pocket? Sure, it's unlikely to have the potential to be as fast as a MacBook. I mean, you can't break physics and there's clearly some space constraints in a smartphone, but I don't know if you've noticed, but smartphones are really fast right now. Way more capable than laptops and desktops that I grew up with, and having an S24 Ultra as my main machine 15 years ago would have been absolutely amazing. I mean, for me, and tell me if I'm crazy in the comments, I'm sure you'll do that, you don't need me to tell you that, but the ultimate smartphone camera is a single big ultra-wide thing on a massive 200 megapixel sensor, such as the one from the S24 Ultra, and with that huge field of view, we then rely on the crazy processing to pinch in and get your standard 1 times, 5 times, maybe 10 times, all while the SoC computes these lens distortion corrections and plucks out details from the pinched in shots. It sounds nuts, and maybe it's a little wayward thinking, maybe it's never going to happen, but I don't see why it couldn't work with a ridiculous amount of compute and a great sensor to go with. Of course, made potentially possible by an insane ISP, image signal processor, that maybe we haven't seen the likes of yet. Maybe this comes in like the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen X or something. Heck, maybe at that point MediaTek is the prevailing SoC maker, or Intel really starts cooking with its ARM chips. Who really knows at that point? Computing is the next step in creating the ultimate smartphone package, and it's one that big firms have already heavily invested in and are progressing forward. In the next 5 or so years, it's my prediction that we'll see a shift and that compute will be the major player behind all of this change. Not additional hardware like new battery tech or new camera tech, not even more RAM or storage. The future isn't necessarily in more hardware, it's in efficiency in these mobile chips, and I am so excited to see what the future holds for smartphone tech. Let me know what you think of the current smartphone formula in the comments, guys, and what would you actually change about it? Do you care at all about camera tech? Do you want to see a 5mm smartphone? Or are you more inclined to think that maybe all of this could make cheaper smartphones better and more capable for the money? And spending $200 to $300 is really the sort of sweet spot for that. Am I crazy for thinking that a smartphone could be a little Pico computer for everyone, not just the Galaxy Ultras of the world? And am I also crazy for thinking that a single ultra-wide camera is the only camera we might need in a few years? Anyway, while you're down there in the comments, completely blasting all of my theories here, be sure to hit like if you enjoyed today's content and subscribe to never miss another upload. I've been Ryan Thomas, and I will catch you later. Cheers.